Okay, Adrian and Stuart, question for you guys. So the new payments platform allows money to be transferred in near real time between customers of either the same or different banks. According to Sydney Morning Herald, in 2019, Westpac confirmed it detected misuse of the Pay ID functionality, which resulted in the private details of almost 100,000 Australians being exposed. In the context of banking system transformation, how do you advise your customers to secure their customers' details from the threat of cyber attacks?
Okay, so firstly, let me start by saying that I'm not a cyber expert. Okay. I remember reading that article, and what struck me was the Westpac's press release at the time. So, yes, the phone numbers and names were released, but they said no bank details, no bank account numbers have been released, which to me is quite an interesting comment. So, for instance, and the reason why, if anyone knows Jeremy Clarkson, he at one stage released his bank account details in the UK and basically dared anyone to be able to try to do anything to his bank account with the bank account details. Ironically, one person managed to make a small £5 donation to a charity through some mechanism, but having a bank account by itself is actually not that dangerous. Releasing your name and phone number, however, is. And in today's world, look, I can sit here and talk about code reviews and getting black hats to come in and making sure that you can't do SQL injections, but that's just hygiene. You should be doing that anyway. The biggest risk to banks these days are understanding your end-to-end process, employee fraud, and the number one is phishing attacks. Okay, so in that particular situation, their phone number and names had been released, so they're opening themselves up to phishing attacks. So that's a big issue. Now, how do you stop that? Well, that's difficult. But in this instance, in terms of the mining of the numbers and accounts, I go back to the process. How did the credentials get out that they managed to call that service? So either, and I don't know what happened, either someone got hold of credentials that enabled them to connect and call that service to bring all that data down, or there is some inside employee fraud involved. And then, so how do you manage that? It's not a tech issue, that's a process issue, that's an internal staffing issue. And in terms of phishing, banks are really good at looking at an individual transaction, a one-off transaction. My dad was on the phone to someone had rang him and said, oh, you've got a Windows problem and we'll fix it, open up this thing, and he had a look at the errors and they said, just type in your credit card details and we'll fix it for you. And while he's on the phone, his mobile phone rang. It was the bank. The bank ringing my dad while he's on the phone to a scammer to say that you're on the phone to a scammer, hang up now. So banks are really good at, when they know they know about something, implementing something there and then. But in terms of the mining of that particular thing, if you understood the context of the transaction, why would one consumer been calling that API 100,000 times? That API goes with, you call that before you call a transaction to actually make a payment. So they should have picked it up. If they're monitoring that, they should have picked up that in the first place. Or if you understand the context of what a customer is doing, you would have understood that something was wrong. But I'll just finish up quickly. So, but the biggest issue these days is phishing, and how do you stay one step ahead of the scammers? Yeah, and it's not just a tech issue; it's an end-to-end process issue.